Some things in this world don't call for help. They wait for the right soul to listen. Ethan Cole hadn't believed in that kind of thing. Not anymore. Not after years of learning that silence usually meant absence, not presence. But that night, just past midnight, something about the way Rex stood at the edge of the trees made him question everything he thought he understood about quiet. The cabin sat alone at the end of a narrow dirt road, a good 5 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense woodland that stretched for miles in every direction. The kind of place where the wind carried stories if you stood still long enough to hear them. And Ethan had chosen it for that exact reason, to escape noise, to outrun memory, to finally live in a place where nothing unexpected ever happened. But Rex wasn't moving. The German shepherd stood rigid on the porch, his broad chest still, ears raised high. Amber eyes locked onto the dark wall of trees beyond the clearing, as if something inside the forest had reached out and caught his attention in a way no sound ever could. Ethan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching him for a long moment, noticing the subtle shift in the dog's posture, the tension in his legs, the quiet intensity that didn't belong to fear but to focus. "You see something, boy?" he murmured, his voice low, steady, the way it had always been when speaking to Rex. But the dog didn't turn, didn't blink, didn't respond the way he usually did, and that was the first sign something was wrong. Rex had been trained to react, to acknowledge, to stay connected, yet now he seemed anchored to something beyond Ethan's reach, something deeper than instinct. The air felt different too, though Ethan couldn't explain how. The usual hum of night insects was gone, replaced by a stillness that pressed against his ears like a held breath, and even the wind, which normally whispered through the tall pines, had fallen completely silent. He stepped off the porch, boots crunching softly against the gravel, the cold night air brushing against his face. And for a moment, he simply stood beside Rex, following his gaze into the darkness, trying to see what the dog saw. But there was nothing, just trees layered in shadow, branches tangled like veins against the faint silver light of the moon. Then Rex moved. Not suddenly, not violently, but with a deliberate step forward, slow and certain, as if answering a call that had been waiting longer than either of them realized. Ethan felt a quiet unease settle in his chest. Not sharp, not alarming, but persistent, like a memory just out of reach. And when Rex took another step, then another, crossing the edge of the clearing toward the woods without looking back, Ethan hesitated only for a second before following. Because whatever Rex was listening to, it wasn't something he was willing to ignore. The trees closed in slowly as they stepped beyond the edge of the clearing, the soft glow from the cabin fading behind them until it was nothing more than a dim suggestion through the branches. And with every foot they moved forward, the forest seemed to change in ways Ethan could not quite explain, the ground beneath his boots growing softer, layered with years of fallen needles that swallowed sound, while the air itself carried a faint metallic scent that did not belong to pine or soil or anything naturally found this deep in the woods. Rex continued ahead without hesitation, his pace steady, his body aligned with a purpose that felt almost practiced, as if he had walked this path before in a place that existed only in memory or instinct. And Ethan noticed how the dog did not weave or wander the way he usually did on trails, but moved in a straight, unwavering line, each step deliberate, each pause meaningful, like he was following something invisible but precise. "Rex," Ethan called softly, not commanding, just grounding himself in the sound of his own voice. But the dog did not slow, only flicked one ear back for a brief second, acknowledging him before continuing forward into the darker stretch where the trees grew taller and closer together, their trunks rising like silent pillars around them. The silence deepened there, not empty but full, as if the forest was holding on to something, and Ethan became aware of his own breathing, the faint rhythm of it too loud against the stillness, so he slowed it, matching his pace to the quiet, letting his senses stretch outward the way they used to when he had to read spaces that could not be trusted. Then he saw it. At first, it was nothing more than a faint mark against the bark of a tree, a shape that did not belong to nature, too sharp, too intentional, and he stepped closer, brushing his fingers against the rough surface until the outline revealed itself under the moonlight, a symbol etched deep into the wood, weathered by time but unmistakable in its form. Ethan froze. His chest tightened, not from fear but recognition, the kind that reaches deeper than thought, and for a moment, the years between now and then seemed to collapse into a single breath. "No," he whispered, barely audible, his voice carrying a weight he had not felt in a long time. "That symbol was not random. It was not local. It was not something anyone out here should know. It belonged to a unit that had not existed on paper for years, a division buried beneath layers of forgotten reports and quiet endings, the kind of thing that never made it into official history." Rex stood beside the tree now, his nose close to the carving, inhaling slowly as if confirming something only he understood. Then he turned his head toward Ethan, eyes steady, waiting, not for a command but for a decision. The path ahead grew darker, the trees bending closer, their branches forming a narrow passage that seemed to pull inward, and somewhere beyond that shadowed corridor, something subtle shifted, not a sound, not movement, but a presence that pressed gently against the edges of awareness. Ethan looked back once toward where the cabin should have been, but the light was gone, swallowed completely by distance and trees, leaving only the quiet and the path in front of him. He exhaled slowly, the breath steadying something inside him that had started to unravel, and without another word, he stepped forward again, following Rex deeper into a place that should not have been there, towards something that had been waiting far longer than he had been willing to remember. The path narrowed until it no longer felt like a natural trail, but something shaped by intention, the trees pressing closer on either side as if guiding them forward, and Ethan became aware that the ground beneath his boots had changed again, firmer now, less forgiving, with subtle impressions that suggested it had once been walked many times before, though not recently, not in years, maybe longer. Rex slowed as they reached a slight incline, his nose lowering toward the earth, tracing a line that only he could see, and then he stopped completely beside a cluster of low brush tangled with dead vines. For a moment, nothing moved. The forest held its breath again, deeper this time, heavier, like it was waiting to see what Ethan would do next. Then Rex pawed at the ground once, not frantic, not uncertain, just a single, deliberate motion, and stepped back, his eyes fixed on the spot. Ethan crouched slowly, brushing aside the brittle leaves with his gloved hand, and beneath them he felt it, not soil, not root, but something flat, cold, and unnatural. He cleared more of the debris, revealing the edge of a metal surface, darkened by time, its outline blending almost perfectly with the forest floor, hidden in plain sight. A hatch. The realization settled into him with a quiet weight, not sudden, not shocking, but inevitable, as if some part of him had already known this was here long before his eyes confirmed it. The hinges were rusted but intact, the handle nearly buried, and just above it, faint but still visible under layers of dirt, was the same symbol carved into the tree, stamped into the metal with a precision that had not faded despite the years. Ethan sat back on his heels, his breath slow, controlled, but his mind moving through memories he had spent a long time learning how to keep still, fragments of briefings, coordinates, missions that were never written down the way others were, operations that existed only in the spaces between official words. "This was not supposed to be here," he said quietly, though the forest offered no answer. Rex let out a low sound, not a growl, not a warning, something softer, almost like recognition, and he stepped closer again, placing one paw lightly against the edge of the hatch as if marking it, as if confirming that this was the place they had been led to. Ethan reached forward, his hand hovering just above the handle, feeling the cold radiating from it, a stillness that did not belong to temperature but to time itself, as though whatever lay beneath had been sealed away not just physically, but deliberately forgotten. He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of understanding, the kind that comes when you realize that opening something does not just reveal what is hidden, it also brings back what was left behind. The wind shifted slightly then, just enough to stir the branches overhead, and for the first time since they entered the woods, a faint sound moved through the trees, not quite a whisper, not quite silence, but something in between, something that felt almost like a distant echo returning after a long absence. Ethan exhaled, steady and quiet, and closed his hand around the handle. Rex stepped back, watching him, waiting, not tense now, but certain, as if the moment they had come for had finally arrived. And as Ethan began to lift the hatch, the forest did not resist, did not warn, did not change. It simply allowed it, like a place that had been waiting all along for someone to remember how to open the door. The hatch opened with a slow resistance, the sound not loud but heavy, like something that had not moved in decades reluctantly giving way. And beneath it, darkness revealed itself not as emptiness but as depth, a hollow space descending into the earth with a stillness that felt preserved rather than abandoned. Ethan leaned slightly forward, letting his eyes adjust, and as the faint moonlight filtered in from above, it traced the outline of a narrow staircase built from reinforced concrete, each step worn but intact, leading downward into a space that had been sealed away with intention and care. The air that rose from below carried a different temperature, cooler, denser, touched with that same metallic scent, but stronger now, layered with something older, something that felt like time itself had settled into the walls and refused to leave. Rex stepped closer, lowering his head toward the opening, his ears forward, his body calm but attentive, not reacting with fear, but with a quiet certainty that this was exactly where they were meant to be. Ethan glanced back once more at the forest around them, but the trees remained still, silent witnesses to a moment that felt removed from everything above ground. And then he shifted his weight forward and placed one boot onto the first step. The descent was careful, measured, each movement deliberate as he made his way down, one hand brushing lightly against the cold wall beside him, grounding himself in the physical reality of the space even as something deeper began to stir beneath the surface of his thoughts. The light from above faded gradually with each step, replaced by a dim, ambient glow that seemed to come from within the structure itself, not electric, not artificial in the usual sense, but something softer, almost residual, as if the place remembered light even after it had been turned off. At the base of the staircase, the space opened into a long corridor, narrow but stable, its walls lined with panels that once held purpose, some still intact, others faded and marked by time, their surfaces carrying labels and codes that Ethan recognized without wanting to. He moved slowly, his gaze scanning the details, the layout, the structure, and with each step forward, the familiarity grew heavier, settling into him like a truth he had spent years avoiding. Rex followed close behind, his footsteps silent against the concrete, his presence steady, anchoring Ethan in the present even as the past began to press forward. Then Ethan saw the first door. It stood on the left side of the corridor, solid, reinforced, its surface marked with the same symbol they had seen above, but this time clearer, preserved, as if this place had been protected from the erosion of the outside world. He approached it without speaking, his hand lifting almost instinctively toward the handle. But he paused just before touching it, noticing something that made his breath slow even further. There was a name etched just beneath the symbol, faint but readable under the dim light, and for a moment, the corridor seemed to narrow, the air growing heavier, not with fear, but with recognition. Ethan did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood there, staring at the letters that should not have been here, the letters that belonged to a story he had been told was over, a chapter that had closed without answers, without witnesses. Behind him, Rex sat down quietly, his gaze fixed on Ethan, not urging him forward, not pulling him back, but waiting, the same way he had at the edge of the woods, the same way he had through every step of the path that led them here. And in that stillness, Ethan understood something he had not allowed himself to consider before, that this place had not been hidden from the world, it had been waiting for him specifically, and now that he was here, there was no turning away from what lay on the other side of that door. The seam gave way under his touch with a quiet precision, not loose, not broken, but designed to open only when pressed in the exact place. And as the hidden panel shifted inward, a narrow space revealed itself beyond, darker than the room behind him, yet carrying a presence that felt more focused, more deliberate, like the center of something carefully constructed rather than the edge of something forgotten. Ethan did not move immediately, his hand still resting against the panel as he studied the opening, allowing his eyes to adjust to the deeper shadow within. And when he finally stepped forward, the air changed again, becoming stiller, almost insulated from the rest of the structure, as if this space had been sealed not just physically, but intentionally separated from everything else. The room beyond was smaller, perhaps 10 feet across, its walls smoother, cleaner, lacking the scattered equipment and layered history of the outer chamber, and at its center stood a single metal table, its surface bare except for a stack of files arranged with exact alignment, untouched by dust, untouched by time. Rex followed but stopped at the threshold, his body lowering slightly as he sat. Choosing not to enter, his gaze fixed on Ethan with a quiet awareness that did not need explanation. Ethan stepped closer to the table, each movement slow, deliberate, his attention narrowing until the rest of the world seemed to fade into the background, and when he reached out, his fingers brushed the top file, feeling the texture of the paper, the slight resistance as he lifted it, the sound of it separating from the stack carrying a weight far greater than the action itself. The cover was plain, unmarked except for a single line typed across the center, sharp and clear, preserved as if it had been placed there only moments ago, and as his eyes moved across the words, something inside him stilled completely. It was not a title he expected to see, not one that should have existed outside of memory, yet there it was, written without hesitation, without doubt, as if this place had never accepted the version of events he had been told to believe. Ethan opened the file slowly, the pages within filled with reports, coordinates, observations, each line precise, each detail aligned with fragments he recognized, but had never been allowed to piece together. And as he turned the pages, a pattern emerged, one that connected missions, locations, and outcomes that had never officially been linked. His breathing remained steady, but his grip tightened slightly, not out of fear, but from the growing understanding that this was not a record of something finished, it was a record of something interrupted. Then he reached the final page. Unlike the others, this one was different, not filled with data, not structured in the same clinical format, but marked by a list, a series of names arranged in a single column, each one followed by a short notation. And as his eyes moved down the page, he recognized them, one by one. Men who had been part of the same operation, men whose stories had ended in silence, in reassignment, in absence. And then he saw it. His own name. Ethan did not move. The room did not change. The air remained still, yet everything within him shifted in a way that could not be undone. His name was there, not crossed out, not marked as completed, but listed among those who had not returned, those who had been recorded as lost to something that had never been fully explained. Behind him, Rex let out a soft breath, not a sound of alarm, not a warning, but something quieter, almost like acknowledgement. And in that moment, Ethan understood that whatever this place had been hiding was not just a secret buried in the woods. It was a truth that had been rewritten, a story that had been closed without him. And now, standing in that room with his name preserved among the missing, he realized that the past he thought he had survived might not have ended the way he was told it did. The page did not move in his hands, yet it felt heavier with every second he held it, as if the weight came not from the paper, but from the meaning pressed into it. And Ethan stood there in the stillness of that hidden room, his eyes fixed on his own name, reading it again and again as though repetition might change it, might shift it into something that made more sense, but it remained exactly as it was, precise and undeniable. He had been listed among the missing, recorded as someone who never came back, and yet here he stood, breathing, remembering, living a life that had continued without question, without explanation, until now. Slowly, he lowered the file back onto the table, his movements controlled, deliberate, not rushed, because something inside him understood that this moment was not about reaction, it was about recognition. Rex remained at the doorway, watching him with steady eyes, his posture unchanged, calm and grounded, as if he had already accepted what Ethan was only beginning to understand. Ethan exhaled quietly and looked around the smaller room again, this time with a different awareness, noticing details he had not fully seen before, the way the walls were too clean compared to the outer chamber, the way the air felt undisturbed, as though no one had entered since the moment it had been sealed. This was not a place of chaos or abandonment, it was a place of decision. He stepped back toward the table and turned the page once more, scanning the list again, tracing each name with his eyes, recalling fragments of voices, faces, brief moments that had never formed into complete memories. And as he reached the bottom of the list, something else caught his attention, a small notation beside his name that he had not fully processed before. It was not a mark of loss. It was not final. It was a designation, short, coded, but familiar enough that his breath slowed as he recognized its meaning. Reassigned. Ethan did not speak. The word did not echo in the room, but it settled into him with a quiet certainty that shifted everything he thought he knew. He had not been lost. He had been moved, redirected, removed from something without being told why. The silence around him seemed to deepen, not empty but aware, as if the place itself had been waiting for him to see that single word, to understand that what had happened all those years ago had not ended the way it was supposed to. Behind him, Rex shifted slightly, his head tilting just enough to draw Ethan's attention. And when Ethan turned, he noticed something he had missed before, just beyond the doorway in the outer room, where the dim light touched the far wall. There was another panel, smaller, lower to the ground, partially concealed by shadow. Ethan held his gaze there for a moment, feeling the quiet pull of it, the same subtle sense of direction that had guided them from the cabin to the forest, from the forest to this place, and now deeper still. He did not hesitate this time. He stepped away from the table, leaving the file exactly as he had found it, because whatever answers it held were no longer enough on their own. The truth was not just written here. It was layered, hidden in pieces that had to be uncovered one at a time. As he moved toward the doorway, Rex stood and walked beside him. Their steps aligned once more, and when they reached the outer room, the air seemed to shift again, just slightly, as though acknowledging that they had reached another threshold. Ethan knelt near the lower panel, his hand hovering just above it, feeling the faint difference in the surface, the subtle indication that it was not part of the original wall, and for a brief moment, he closed his eyes, not in fear, not in hesitation, but in acceptance. Because whatever waited beyond this next layer, whatever truth had been buried deeper than the rest, he understood now that it had never been meant to stay hidden forever. It had been waiting, patiently, for the moment he was ready to see it. The panel responded to his touch with the same quiet precision as the one before, a soft shift beneath his palm that felt less like opening something hidden and more like being allowed to continue. And as it moved inward, a low compartment revealed itself, not deep, not complex, but intentional in its simplicity, as if everything placed within it had been chosen with care and left without the need for explanation. Ethan leaned closer, the dim light catching the edges of what lay inside, and for a moment, he did not reach in, he only observed, letting his eyes take in the details before his hands followed. There was no equipment here, no files stacked with data or reports, only a small, rectangular box made of brushed metal, its surface smooth, unmarked, resting alone at the center of the compartment. Rex stepped closer this time, lowering his head near Ethan's shoulder, his breath steady, his presence no longer holding back at the threshold, but moving forward with a quiet assurance that this was the final place they had been led to. Ethan hesitated for only a second before lifting the box, feeling its weight, not heavy, but solid, the kind of weight that comes from something meaningful rather than something large. The lid opened without resistance, revealing its contents in the same understated way everything else in this place had revealed itself, without force, without drama, simply present and waiting to be seen. Inside, resting on a dark fabric lining, was a single object, small enough to fit in the palm of his hand, yet carrying a presence that drew his full attention the moment he saw it. A military dog tag. Ethan's breath slowed as he reached for it, his fingers closing gently around the metal, lifting it into the light where the engraved letters became visible, clear and untouched by time. The name etched into it was not his. It was someone else's, someone whose voice he could almost remember, whose face existed just beyond the edge of clarity. And as he turned the tag slightly, letting the light trace across its surface, another detail revealed itself beneath the name, a second line, smaller, but unmistakable. The same unit designation, the same operation. Ethan stood very still, the dog tag resting in his hand, and for a moment, the room seemed to narrow again, not with pressure, but with focus, as if everything in this place had been guiding him toward this single point of understanding. He closed his eyes briefly, not to escape the moment, but to allow it to settle, to let the fragments of memory that had remained scattered begin to align in a way they had never done before. A moment returned to him then, not sharply, not completely, but enough. A choice made under pressure, a shift in position, a decision that had changed the outcome of something larger than he had realized at the time. He had been moved, reassigned, but not randomly, not accidentally. Someone had taken his place. Someone had stepped into a path that had been meant for him. Rex exhaled softly beside him, his body relaxing in a way that had not happened since they entered the woods, and Ethan opened his eyes again, looking down at the tag in his hand with a clarity that replaced the confusion he had carried into this place. This was not about something hidden to frighten him. It was not about something waiting in the dark. It was about something that had been left behind, not lost, not forgotten, but waiting for the one person who needed to understand it. Ethan closed the lid of the box gently, the sound soft but final, and held it for a moment before placing it back into the compartment exactly as he had found it, because some things were not meant to be taken away, they were meant to be acknowledged. He stood up slowly, his movements steady, his mind no longer searching for answers but holding on to a truth that had finally revealed itself. And as he turned toward the corridor, Rex moved with him, their steps aligned once more, the silence around them no longer heavy, but calm, as if the forest above, the structure below, and everything in between had finally said what it needed to say. The corridor felt different as they walked back through it, not because anything had changed in its structure, but because something within Ethan had shifted, the weight he carried when he entered now replaced by a quiet understanding that settled deeper than explanation, and each step toward the staircase felt less like leaving a hidden place behind and more like carrying something forward that had finally found its way back to him. Rex moved beside him with an ease that had been absent before, his posture relaxed, his ears no longer fixed on distant signals, as if whatever had called him into the woods had now grown silent, its purpose fulfilled. When they reached the base of the stairs, Ethan paused for a moment, his hand brushing lightly against the wall, feeling the cold surface one last time, grounding himself in the reality of where he had been, not questioning it, not analyzing it, simply accepting that some truths did not need to be explained in order to be real. He began the climb upward, each step steady, measured, the faint light from above growing stronger as the darkness below receded. And when he finally reached the hatch, he pushed it open with a calm certainty, the night air meeting him again with a softness that felt different from before, no longer heavy, no longer holding its breath. The forest greeted them in silence, but it was no longer the kind that pressed against the ears. It was open, natural, alive in a way that felt familiar again, as though whatever had been waiting beneath it had now settled back into its place. Ethan stepped out onto the ground, the cool earth firm beneath his boots, and he turned once more to look at the hatch before lowering it carefully back into position, covering it with the same leaves and branches that had hidden it for so many years, not to conceal it again, but to let it rest, to return it to the quiet it had held for so long. Rex stood nearby, watching him, his tail giving a single slow movement, not excited, not uncertain, just present, and when Ethan straightened, their eyes met for a brief moment that carried more understanding than any words could have. They walked back through the trees together, the path no longer narrow or pressing, the branches no longer closing in, and as the cabin came back into view, its small porch light glowing faintly against the night, Ethan felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. Not relief, not closure, but a sense of alignment, as though a part of his life that had been left unfinished had finally been given its place again. He paused at the edge of the clearing, looking back once toward the forest, but there was nothing there now, no signal, no pull, only the quiet presence of trees standing as they always had, unchanged, patient, and still. Rex moved past him toward the cabin, his steps light, his body at ease, and Ethan followed, the distance between where they had been and where they were now measured not in miles, but in understanding. Inside, the cabin felt warmer than before, the familiar scent of wood and worn fabric grounding him in the present. And as Rex settled down near the hearth, resting his head on his paws, Ethan stood for a moment in the center of the room, his gaze soft, his mind clear in a way it had not been in years. He did not reach for anything, did not speak, did not question what he had seen, because he knew now that not everything was meant to be carried away in words or objects. Some things were meant to be recognized, honored, and then left where they belonged. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark line of trees beyond the clearing, his reflection faint against the glass. And for the first time since arriving here, the forest did not feel like something separate from him. It felt like something that had simply been waiting for him to listen. And as the night settled quietly around the cabin, Ethan understood something simple and steady, something that did not need to be spoken aloud, that sometimes the past does not return to haunt us, it returns to be understood, and when it is, it no longer follows, it simply rests.